In 1965, an American network put 6 men in Nazi uniforms and asked them to be funny.
What was the question?
Forget.
4 of those men were Jewish. One of them had a number tattooed on his left forearm. He had been given that number in a camp run by the very people he was now playing for laughs. Hogan's Heroes ran for 6 seasons and 168 episodes. It was one of the most watched comedies of its time and one of the strangest programs ever put on American television. A prisoner of war camp as the setting for a sitcom. German guards played for comedy, and behind the cameras, a cast who knew the real thing from the inside. What happened to them afterwards is stranger still. One was murdered in his own apartment, and that case has never been solved. One died on his own birthday. One walked away in the middle of the run and became something else entirely. And in July of 2025, more than half a century after the final episode, the last of them died. This is what became of all of them. Bob Crane did not come out of acting. He came out of radio.
Major Hoople.
In the early 60s, he was the highest-rated morning man in Los Angeles. Fast, sharp, and a genuinely good drummer who could play along with his own jingles. By the time he was cast as Colonel Hogan, he was already a famous voice. He had been doing it for years before Hollywood noticed. His morning show was built on interviews and quick comedy, and he was good enough at it that the network first tried him out in small television parts around the radio work before anyone thought of handing him a series. That is exactly why the show works. Hogan is not the brave hero of a war picture. He is a salesman. He talks his way out of everything, and Crane plays him as a man who never doubts himself for a second. After the cancellation in 1971, the work dried up. He toured dinner theater, moving from town to town, chasing a comeback that never arrived. Scottsdale was one of those stops. He was appearing in a play there, staying in a rented apartment near the theater, and he had been on the phone with his family the night before. On the 29th of June, 1978, Bob Crane was found dead in his rented apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona. He had been beaten to death in his sleep. He was 49 years old. The case dragged on for 16 years. In 1994, a friend of his, John Henry Carpenter, was tried for the murder and acquitted. Nobody has ever been convicted. The killing of Bob Crane is still an open case. Werner Klemperer was born in 1920 in Cologne. His father was Otto Klemperer, one of the great conductors of Europe and a Jewish man in a country that was about to throw him out. It is worth understanding how large a figure his father was. Otto Klemperer conducted the major orchestras of Germany and was one of the defining interpreters of the German repertoire, which made him, in the eyes of the new government, exactly the kind of man to be removed from public life. The family left for the United States in the 30s. Werner became an American, served in the American Army during the war, and afterwards built a career in small, serious parts. When the role of Klink was offered to him, he set one condition. That condition has become the single best-known fact about the entire series. Klink was never allowed to win. No episode could end with a German victory. Klemperer wanted the man he played to be the fool, every time, never the threat, never anyone to look up to. It worked. He was nominated 6 times for an Emmy for the part and won twice. For an actor whose family had fled the real Germany, Klink was not a compromise. He was a weapon. Music stayed with him all his life. Long after the series ended, he worked as a narrator with symphony orchestras, standing in front of the same repertoire his father had conducted. Werner Klemperer died on the 6th of December 2000 of cancer. He was 80. I know nothing. I see nothing.
I see nothing.
It is probably the most quoted line in the whole series, and it comes out of the mouth of an Austrian Jew who fled his country in '38. John Banner was born in 1910 and grew up in Vienna, where he worked as a stage actor. He happened to be touring Switzerland when Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany. He could not go back. He arrived in the United States with almost no English. He knew exactly what he was playing. In an interview in 1967, he said that Schultz was not a Nazi, that he saw him as a kind of decency that exists in every generation. What he brought to Schultz was not stupidity. It was a man deciding again and again not to see. Every time Schultz turns his back on something he has clearly noticed, he is choosing not to be part of it, and that reading only works because the actor knew precisely what the alternative looked like. After the series, he moved back to Europe. On the 28th of January, 1973, he died in Vienna of an internal hemorrhage. The 28th of January was also the day he was born. He made it to 63, exactly, not one day more. He was the first of the principal cast to go. 9 more would follow. Robert Clary was born Robert Widerman in Paris in 1926, the youngest of 14 children. He was 16 when he and most of his family were taken. He survived 31 months in the camps. He was tattooed with the number A5714. He survived a death march to Gross Rosen, in which half of 4,000 prisoners died. He was finally liberated from Buchenwald. His parents and 10 of his brothers and sisters did not come back. He survived, he said later, partly because he could sing. On Sundays, he performed for the SS Guards. For that, he was sometimes given an extra piece of bread. And 20 years later, that same man stood on a set in California, inside a fake German prison camp, making a comedy out of it. He never saw a contradiction in it. The show was about prisoners of war, he said, not about the camps. Those were two completely different worlds, and confusing them was the real disrespect. He said nothing in public about his own war until 1980. Then he began to speak, because there were people claiming it had never happened. He spent the rest of his life telling school children what he had seen. He kept working for decades after the series, most of it on daytime soaps, where a whole second audience knew him without ever having seen him in a beret. He married Natalie Cantor, a daughter of the comedian Eddie Cantor, and they stayed together until her death in the 90s. Robert Clary died on the 16th of November, 2022, at home in Los Angeles. He was 96, and at that moment, he was the last of the original leads. The Englishman of the group was not really called Richard Dawson. He was born Colin M. in Gosport on the English South Coast in 1932, and he went to sea with the Merchant Navy at 14. In the show, Newkirk is the pickpocket, the forger, the man who can open any lock. Dawson played him dry and quick, and it made him known in America, but not nearly as known as what came next. In 1976, he took over a game show called Family Feud and became one of the most familiar faces on American daytime television. He kissed nearly every female contestant on the cheek, a habit that made him both beloved and criticized, and one he refused to drop. Before that, he had been a regular on the celebrity panel of Match Game, and it was there that producers noticed what he could do with an audience. He was quick, he was rude in a way that read as affectionate, and he was completely at ease with people who had never been on television before. He was once married to the British film star Diana Dors. He later married a woman he first met as a contestant on his own show. Richard Dawson died on the 2nd of June, 2012 of esophageal cancer. He was 79. If you grew up with this show, tell me in the comments which of them was the series for you. I read all of them, and if you want more of these, subscribing genuinely helps the channel. Ivan Dixon played Kinchloe, the radio man, and in the middle of the 1960s, he was one of very few black actors with a regular role on an American network series. At the time, that was not a detail. He had already shown what he could do. In the film Nothing But a Man from 1964, he gave a lead performance that is still counted among the best of that decade. Away from the camera, he was active in the civil rights movement, and he was open about the gap between the parts being written for black actors and the parts he knew they could play. Kinchloe was competent, technical, and respected inside the unit, which in 1965 was itself unusual, but it was still a supporting role in someone else's show. After 5 seasons, he left. He wanted more than jokes beside a radio set, and he did what almost no actor of his generation managed. He became a director. He directed dozens of episodes of series everybody knew, police shows, dramas, primetime television. Behind the camera, he built a second career that lasted longer than his first. Ivan Dixon died in March 2008. He was 76. Larry Hovis played Carter, the demolitions expert who never seemed entirely sure what he was doing. He came from Texas, he was a singer before he was an actor, and he had the kind of timing you only learn on a stage. After the show, he mostly disappeared, and that was a choice. He went into teaching. For years, he taught students at a Texas university who had no idea their lecturer had once been in one of the most watched comedies in the country. By all accounts, he preferred it. The students got a teacher who had actually worked in the industry he was describing, and he got a life that did not depend on the phone ringing. Larry Hovis died in September 2003 of esophageal cancer. He was 67. Of all the stories in this cast, this may be the heaviest. Leon Askin was born Leo Ashkenazi in Vienna in 1907 into a Jewish family. He was working as an actor in Dusseldorf until 1933, when he was thrown out of the theater for being Jewish. He was arrested, he was beaten, and he escaped to Paris. In 1940, he reached New York with almost no money and almost no English. He joined the American Army Air Forces and served in the war. It was while he was serving that word reached him. His parents, Malvine and Samuel, had been murdered at Treblinka. 20 years later, he played a German general in a comedy series, and he did it for 6 seasons. He never treated it as a betrayal. Burkhalter is a bully in a uniform, permanently irritated and permanently outwitted by prisoners he considers beneath him. There is a kind of revenge built into playing him that way. He moved back to Vienna in 1994 and kept performing there until the end cabaret theater, the Volksoper. The city that had driven him out eventually gave him its highest honors. Leon Askin died in Vienna on the 3rd of June 2005. He was 97. The most frightening German in the series was the Gestapo major, Hochstetter, the one character who was not written for laughs, and the only man Klink was genuinely afraid of. He was played by Howard Caine, born Howard Cohen in Nashville, Tennessee. He was Jewish too. He was one of the most sought-after dialect coaches in Hollywood, a man who could put on and take off an accent like a coat. Away from the studio, he was a musician. He played banjo and lived inside American folk music, roughly the opposite of the man he put on screen. The accent work was the reason he was cast at all. Directors used him when they needed a specific region, a specific class, a specific decade, and Hochstetter's clipped, barking German is a technical performance before it is a frightening one. Howard Caine died in December 1993 of a heart attack. He was 67. When Ivan Dixon left, somebody had to sit behind that radio. That somebody was Kenneth Washington, born in 1936 in Ethel, Mississippi, and raised in California. He played Sergeant Baker in the 6th and final season. 1 year only, the show was canceled after it. He kept working in American television for another 2 decades, in police series and dramas, and stopped at the end of the 80s. Then he went back to school and finished the university degree he had never taken. He had a recognizable face long before Stalag 13. He turned up in Star Trek, in I Dream of Jeannie, in Petticoat Junction, and he had a recurring role as a police officer in Adam 12, the kind of working career that kept a lot of actors of his generation employed without ever making them famous. On the 18th of July, 2025, Kenneth Washington died at home in Beverly Hills. He was 88. With him went the last of the principal cast. 60 years after the first episode, not one of the men in that camp is left. Almost. There is one person left. She was never in the regular cast, and she appeared in only 7 episodes, but in those 7 episodes, she played the one character who could outsmart Hogan. Nita Talbot played Maria, the Russian spy. It earned her an Emmy nomination in 1968. She stopped acting in the 90s and disappeared from public life completely. She is 95. Of everyone who ever stood in that camp, the colonel, the commandant, the sergeant, the general, the last one standing is the woman who was never officially one of them.